Judith Heumann was a true icon in the disability rights movement, which, by the way, was a thing. We just don't really learn about it in school. Heumann used a wheelchair for mobility as a result of contracting polio at 18 months old. All throughout her life, seeing the world from a wheelchair helped Heumann see just how unaccommodating the world truly is to those who live with disabilities. Moreover, Heumann experienced firsthand how persons with disabilities like herself were seen as less valuable than those who didn't have disabilities and were made to feel unwelcome in all kinds of public places. She led Americans with disabilities in the fight for their right to be seen and treated as full-fledged members of society. Even in the 21st century, Heumann continued to speak on behalf of disabled people everywhere through books, podcasts, speeches, and more. She literally fought for the rights of the disabled to her dying breath, which she recently took on March 4th, 2023, at the age of 75. Today, I want to honor Heumann's memory with a video essay on her life and legacy. For those of you who don't know, this is actually the 130th video essay I've made for my channel, From Laura's Perspective. Said essays are on many different topics, and if you go check them out, you're sure to find a category of essays that piques your interest. Once you find it, just smash subscribe, and that's your card to my video essay library. After you do that, tap the notification bell so that your phone goes off whenever I post a video essay that might interest you. With that out of the way, let's start talking about the ruling warrior that was Judy Heumann. So how did this disability rights pioneer evolve? Judith Ellen Heumann was born December 18, 1947 in Philadelphia, but would eventually be raised in Brooklyn, New York. Heumann's parents, Werner and Ilse Heumann, were Jewish immigrants from Germany who were actually much luckier than their other Jewish German relatives who'd been killed in the Holocaust. At 18 months old, Heumann contracted polio, confining her to a wheelchair for the rest of her life. Heumann's family saw her paralysis as a tragedy that was to be mourned, but this wasn't how Heumann saw it. As Heumann put it herself, "Disability only becomes a tragedy for me when society fails to provide the things we need to lead our lives. Job opportunities or barrier-free buildings, for example. It's not a tragedy to me that I'm living in a wheelchair." When Heumann was a little girl, her local public elementary school barred her from attending on the grounds that her wheelchair and her inability to walk were a fire hazard. So instead of public education, Heumann was given home instruction twice a week for about an hour each visit. After exhaustive fighting on the part of Heumann's parents for her to be included in the public education system, Heumann was allowed to go to a special school for disabled children for 4th grade. Per city policy, Heumann was to return to home instruction for high school. Heumann's mother rallied against this policy with other enraged parents who put enough pressure on the school board to reverse it. This allowed Judy to enter high school in 1961. From the time she was 9 to the time she was 18, Heumann spent every summer at Camp Jened, a summer camp for children with disabilities in Hunter, New York. Heumann's camp experience brought her a greater awareness of the shared disabled experience, with her later saying, "We had the same joy together, the same anger over the way we were treated, and the same frustrations at opportunities we didn't have." At Camp Jened, Heumann met Bobby Lynn and Frida Tankis, both of whom she would later work with as disability rights activists. Heumann began making major moves towards rights for people with disabilities while working towards her undergraduate degree at Long Island University. She organized rallies and protests with other students with and without disabilities, demanding access to her classrooms by ramps and the right to live in a dorm. Remember that thing about how Heumann couldn't go to a public elementary school because they said it was a fire hazard? Well, the same thing happened again in 1970 when the New York Board of Education refused to give Heumann a teaching license on the grounds that she supposedly could not get herself or her students out of the building in case of a fire. Heumann sued the board for discrimination, and the case settled without a trial. Heumann then became the first wheelchair user to teach in New York City and taught elementary school there for 3 years. This paved the way for Heumann's next big contribution to society, called Disabled in Action. News of Heumann's lawsuit with the Board of Education spread across America, and disabled Americans mailed Heumann praising her for her bravery and breaking of ground. In wake of this influx of letters, Heumann and several friends founded Disabled in Action, an organization that focused on securing the protection of people with disabilities under civil rights laws through political protest in 1970. It was originally called Handicapped in Action, but Heumann disliked that name and lobbied to change it. Early versions of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 were vetoed by President Richard Nixon in October 1972 and March 1973. In 1972, DIA demonstrated in New York City with a sit-in protesting one of the vetoes. Led by Heumann, 80 activists staged this sit-in on Madison Avenue, stopping traffic. Without Judy and her bold contributions, we wouldn't have a very important piece of legislation that we know today as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. After the way the education system treated young Judy, she decided as an adult that she wanted to do more to ensure that all children with disabilities had equal access to an education on par with non-disabled children. While serving as a legislative assistant to the chairperson of the U.S. Senate Committee on Labor and Public Welfare in 1974, Heumann helped develop legislation that would become the IDEA. I could probably make a whole separate video about the IDEA, but for now, I'll just sum it up for you. Inspired by the 1954 court case Brown versus Topeka Board of Education, Heumann helped the Committee of Labor and Public Welfare come up with a formal law that would desegregate disabled and non-disabled children in schools. IDEA is composed of 4 parts, the main being Part A and Part B. Part A covers the general provisions of the law. Part B covers assistance for education of all children with disabilities. Part C covers infants and toddlers with disability, including children from birth to age 3. And Part D consists of the national support programs administered at the federal level, many of which still exist today. Each part of the law has remained largely the same since the original enactment in 1975. Throughout the years of IDEA's reauthorization, its many components have become key concepts when learning about IDEA. Simply put, Judy Heumann is largely to thank for this legislation and what it's done for children with disabilities ever since. The number one most important contribution Judy Heumann made to the disability rights movement was the 504 sit-in. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 was the first U.S. federal civil rights protection for people with disabilities. When Joseph Califano, U.S. Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, refused to sign meaningful regulations for the act, Heumann and other people with disabilities planned to sit in at the HEW building with help from Kitty Cohn and Mary Jane Owen. From April 5th to May 4th, 1977, over 300 disability rights activists refused to leave the building until Califano changed his mind about signing those regulations. Even when Califano made clear that no meals or medication would be given to the protesters, that didn't stop them. Kitty Cone developed a way to keep the medications cool by taping a box over the air conditioner unit to store the medications of the disabled protesters. Additionally, the protesters received support from the Black Panther Party after receiving a call from Brad Lomax, a disabled protester with multiple sclerosis and a member of the Black Panther Party. Lomax called the Black Panthers to support the protesters with meals, and the Black Panthers brought them hot meals and snacks for the duration of the sit-in. As of 2021, the 504 sit-in is still the longest sit-in to ever take place at a federal building, and the people at the San Francisco building couldn't have done it without Judy Heumann. The 504 sit-in may have been the most notable thing Judy did in her life, but it certainly wasn't the last thing she ever did. So now let's talk about what Judy accomplished after the 504 sit-in. Although Heumann did her most notable activism in the 1970s, she still did things to maintain her status as an important figure throughout the 21st century. Most notably, President Barack Obama appointed Heumann as the inaugural holder of the position of Special Advisor on International Disability Rights for the U.S. State Department. Heumann held this position until 2017, when the new administration disestablished this position until it was reestablished under the Biden administration. After leaving her position as special advisor, Heumann worked as a senior fellow at the Ford Foundation until April 2019. At Ford, she worked to help advance the inclusion of disability in the foundation's work. She also promoted the intentional inclusion of disability in philanthropy work. Heumann produced a paper co-written by Catherine Salinas and Michelle Hess titled Roadmap for Inclusion: Changing the Face of Disability in Media. This paper explores the lack of representation of disabled people in front of and behind the camera, as well as prominent stereotypes of disabled characters when represented in the media, and concludes with a call to action to increase disabled representation in the media. So how has the media shed light on Judy Heumann and her contributions? Heumann passed away last month on March 4th, but even in her last few years of life, she's taken to the media to comment on the treatment and rights of people with disabilities. In March 2021, Heumann began producing a bi-weekly podcast called The Human Perspective, where she spoke with disabled changemakers and their allies. The podcast featured opening music by artist Lockie and featured guests such as filmmaker James Lebrecht, activists Lydia X, Z Brown, and Leroy F. In 2017, Heumann delivered a TED Talk about, you guessed it, the experience of living with a disability in America. In 2018, Comedy Central made an episode of Drunk History about the 504 sit-in, in which Heumann was portrayed by notable disabled actress Ali Stroker. In 2020, a documentary entitled Crip Camp was made about Camp Jened, the disabled kids camp Heumann went to, and Heumann appeared in the film to comment on her experiences at Jened. Most notably, Heumann has written and published 2 autobiography books that I myself haven't read, but really want to. The first is Being Human, an unrepentant memoir of a disability rights activist. The second is Rolling Warrior, the incredible, sometimes awkward, true story of a rebel girl on wheels who helped spark a revolution. Thank you all so much for watching. Judy Heumann is an important historical figure who we don't talk about nearly enough. Much less do we talk about her important contributions to the disability rights movement, such as the 504 sit-in and Disabled in Action. In fact, I didn't even know who she was until I heard her death being announced and heard about her life and contributions from a close friend of hers on a Spotify podcast. Have you or has someone you know ever been given accommodations from their school to help them learn with a disability? Well, without Judy Heumann, you or they might not even be able to go to school or do anything out in the community. So I highly suggest you learn all that you can about her by reading her memoirs or listening to her podcasts. This video should have been a good help, but it was really only meant to be a start. I have many videos here on my channel to help you learn about people, events, media, nature, and social justice issues that you might not know or understand much about. If you liked what you saw today, go check out some of those. If those video essays, their versatility, and their insightfulness are what you're looking for in a channel, then mine's the one for you to subscribe to. Once you do, tap the bell icon so you always get an alert on your phone when I post a video you might want to see. I hope you'll do that so that I can see you next time.